Welcome to The Reset, a weekly dispatch of experiences and takes on performance and modern care. For the athlete, the practitioner, and the thinker, we break down recovery, health, and performance systems to reshape the conversation around wellness. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Reset. This week's article will be covering part 2 of the musculoskeletal system, how the stable foundation functions in movement. In the previous article, we started the discussion on the musculoskeletal system. We went the route of breaking it into key players for major movement and upright positioning for the body for daily life. Those muscles we chose were the glutes, the deltoids, the spinal erectors, and the core. There are many other muscles involved in these tasks and movements, but we narrowed it down to these ones to make it easier to understand for the time being. The goal wasn't to memorize anatomy, and it isn't today, but rather to recognize the body's functions as a coordinated system rather than a collection of isolated parts. This week, we're going a layer deeper. Understanding muscles is helpful, but muscles alone don't explain movement. They don't explain stability. And they certainly don't explain why the body sometimes adapts well and other times highlights pain or limitation. To understand that, we need to look at how the system coordinates itself, and we must dive deeper into the function of this system and its capacity to make detail-oriented choices based on the environment it is in. And so I want you to start thinking about movement not just as a system of muscles contracting to produce movement at each joint, but rather a system that includes the coordinated efforts of other systems to make correct decisions based on what is working with, constantly. The Reset, Episode 34, The Musculoskeletal System, Part 2. Section 1. Joints as decision makers, not hinges. When we mention joints, it's easy to envision simple mechanical parts. Bone on bone, hinges at the knees, ball and socket joints at the hips and shoulders, etc., etc. In reality, though, joints function more like decision-making hubs, taking in information constantly about where the body is in space and the forces required to continuously keep a stable foundation to create and distribute forces through each movement. This is done through nerve receptors that have the ability to collect feedback from your limbs at all muscular contractions in your body, and use that information to decide where it is in space. Every joint in the body must continuously balance two competing demands: mobility, or the ability to move freely throughout the joint's range of motion, and stability, the ability to control resisted movement or excess movement, and maintain the integrity of the connection between two bones. Too much mobility without control creates vulnerability and ultimately opens the door to future degeneration and injury. Too much stiffness, on the other hand, limits movement and fluidity of movement, which can place intense force strain on the joint and distribute responsibility into other areas. This balance is not fixed. The same joint behaves differently depending on speed, load, and intent, and also could change depending on the day, month, year, or state that your body is in. Let's look at an example. The hip joint, the largest joint with the most surface area and most powerful suction for stability. It also offers some of the largest ranges of motion in your body, which can be complex. With this increased capacity to move comes a responsibility to keep sturdy and supported. A hip that moves easily while walking up a hill requires more range of motion into hip flexion, if you have that range. It must then be stable enough to accept the transmission of force from the hip muscles in order to produce the movement that increases that range and allows you to walk up the hill. This is an example of a holistically operational hip, which can be both mobile and stable at the same time, and quite frankly should be. If that same hip was to lose integrity, as it would with an injury such as a labral tear or osteoarthritis, then the hip joint stability would suffer, causing more strain to be placed on the surrounding soft tissue to help stabilize it. In these cases, We see a typically normal response of acute strain after prolonged periods of repetitive movement. Because the body's great at scrambling when minor issues are presented, it can get the job done by committee, distributing responsibility to other parts. When it exceeds those parts' capacity to do so, we see breakdown. When we talk about the joint's ability to sense where it is in space and adapt accordingly, we can look closely at the joint's stiffness as a result of the inability to create balanced tension within the joint itself. If certain muscles are overstrained or undertrained, or ligaments or tendons are damaged on one side of the joint, there will be an imbalance of pressure on the joint itself, causing the nervous system to realize this and create increased tension via muscular tone where it's needed. Joints do not lock or unlock on their own. They respond to information from the nervous system and the tension produced by surrounding muscles. In this sense, joints don't simply allow movement, rather they regulate it. And that regulation depends on something deeper than the joint itself. Section 2. The nervous system, the hidden driver of anatomy. Last month we covered the nervous system and its role, so let's briefly reiterate that role in this context. Muscles do not act independently. Remember, without the input from the nerves, the muscles do not create movement at the joint. So you see the loop of information that must go on from here. Basically put, sensory input from the nerves and muscles and joints, send a message to the brain for processing, and a sensory output message is sent back to your body part for processing movement. This is all in response to the input to the body. We can break it down further in more detail from here, but for our purposes right now, this will suffice. Every movement you make, turning your head, reaching for a cup, standing from a chair, begins as a neural event. The nervous system gathers information about position, balance, load, and intention, and then determines how much tension to produce and where. Much of this happens before conscious awareness. Your body predicts what is about to happen and prepares in advance based on past experiences and knowing itself in its injury state or otherwise. This is why posture subtly adjusts before you lift something heavy, or something will brace before you produce a larger movement pattern. Or also why balance corrections occur faster than you can perceive them. This predictive control reveals an important principle. Strength alone does not create stability. A strong muscle that activates at the wrong time can still place stress on a joint. Coordination, timing, and sequencing matter more than raw force. Anatomy provides potential, and the nervous system decides how that potential is used. Once movement begins, forces must travel somewhere, and those are also regulated by neural feedback from the joints. Section 3. Load, tension, and force transfer. In clinic, a lot of my time is spent assessing, treating, and explaining to patients how their body failed to accept the position, forces, or duration of time spent under that stress that acted on it, causing the breakdown that we are seeing. I see plenty of scenarios that highlight the importance of proper management of stress when it comes to the body's ability to move and function in life. The human body is designed to manage load, not eliminate it. So, we can organize force transfer in the way that makes sense functionally. A. From the ground upward when you walk or jump. B. From the hands inward when you push or pull. And C. From the trunk outward during rotation, lifting, or bracing for large movement patterns. This is a gross simplification, but it will get your mind thinking in a way that's more functional when it comes to your body, rather than reactive and positional. When there is equal enough balance in this force transfer and transmission, the body will refute risk of tissue breakdown and therefore reduce chances of injury. Our main focus area of force transmission is the midsection of the human body. The spine and the core act as central transmission systems, redirecting and dispersing these forces so that no single structure absorbs excessive stress. This is why the core does not exist primarily to create movement. Its role is to manage pressure and tension so force can move safely between the upper and lower body. When the system functions well, movement feels efficient and controlled. When it breaks down, force finds alternate routes and leaks into joints or tissues. Joints or tissues that were not designed to handle stress may be compensating. Over time, this can show up as stiffness, fatigue, or pain, which is often far from the original source of the problem. Understanding anatomy is not just about identifying structures. It's about understanding where force should go and what happens when it doesn't. One of the most powerful tools that the body uses to manage this force is something we do every moment of the day: breathing. Section 4. Breathing, bracing, and internal pressure. Breathing is one of the most overlooked components of movement and stability. The diaphragm, for example, does more than just pull air into the lungs via its own contractions. It works together with the abdominal muscles and pelvic floor to regulate pressure inside the torso. This internal pressure acts like a stabilizing support system for the spine before movement even begins. It is an integral part of the core stabilization system in general, but when we add external load to the body, such as compound movements in the gym, lifting objects at home, or even sneezing or coughing, we see its true importance, as it must both support as well as provide force distribution to the upper and lower body. Bracing, therefore, is not about rigidity. It's about creating the right amount of tension at the right time and enabling control of certain movements during a functional pattern. In this coordinated effort, too little pressure and the spine becomes vulnerable. Too much tension and the movement is limited and often becomes inefficient and fatiguing. Everyday actions like bending, reaching, standing, lifting will involve subtle adjustments in breathing and tension that most people never notice. When these patterns become disrupted, the body often compensates elsewhere. This is why breathing patterns can influence posture, movement quality, and even pain experiences. But perhaps the most important feature of the human body is not how it stabilizes in the movement, and it's how it changes over time. Section 5. Adaptation. Why the body changes. So, what do these factions of the system all have in common? How do we measure their effectiveness? How do we decide if things are functioning optimally? We can start by assessing how your body adapts to any situation, good or bad. The body is not static. It is constantly adapting to the demands placed on it. Tissue becomes stronger, stiffer, or more flexible depending on how it's used. Neural pathways become more efficient with repetition. Posture, coordination, and breathing strategies all evolve based on habits and their environment. The most effective way to create a great relationship between your mind and your body is to imagine these changes or adaptations, whether they're positive or yielded negative results, as functional responses to stress. Like art, these adaptations are neither good or bad. They just are. How you perceive them can change the way you view your body's ability to function. And stress, like these changes, can be both productive or non-productive. They simply reflect what the system experiences most often. The same adaptation that improves performance in one context may create limitation in another. A posture developed for long hours of sitting may not serve someone during athletic activity. A stabilization strategy that protects an injury may become inefficient once healing is done. Understanding this anatomy, therefore, is not about returning the body to some perfect ideal state. It's about recognizing that structure, control, and demand continuously shape one another. Where this leads next. So far, we've explored the major muscle groups in part 1 and how joints, the nervous system, breathing, and load management coordinate movement and adaptation in this part. With these 2 articles, we now have sufficient knowledge of the human anatomy in order to both visualize how these individual structures connect the system to an overall functional state and how that functional state carries out daily tasks. But there still is a crucial piece missing: the connective network that links all of these systems together and creates a tether from the mind to the body. Muscles do not pull on bones in isolation, as we've discussed. Forces do not travel through the body in straight lines, which we've also discussed. And stability does not come from individual structures alone, which is the overall theme of this blog. There is an integrated system that connects everything from head to toe. In the next article, we will explore the fascial system, the continuous web of connective tissue that distributes tension, stores energy, and helps explain how the body truly functions as a whole. In health and performance, Alex.